And welcome back. Tensions continue to simmer across Gauteng as the crackdown on squalor transport reaches a boiling point, leaving thousands of learners stranded and parents in a state of anxiety. Now, following the recent tragic loss of 14 school children in the Vaal, authorities have intensified their safety blitz, resulting in the widespread impounding of hundreds of unroadworthy and unlicensed vehicles. In a defiant response to what they term harassment, a significant number of operators have officially downed tools, bringing squalor transportation to a grinding halt in several districts as they demand the immediate release of their seized fleets. A standoff took a decisive turn yesterday during a high-stakes engagement at the University of Johannesburg's Soweto campus, where the MEC for transport in the province, Kedibone Diale-Tlabela, stood her ground, despite a vocal boycott from major operator groups. Now, let's continue this conversation further. We're joined by the chairperson of the Greater Gauteng Learner Transport Organization, Thabo Swakamisa. Thabo, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Perhaps give us context. What is the nature of, at least from the side of the Greater Gauteng Learner Transport Association, what is the grievances that the operators have with the province, specifically around the province impounding vehicles that are unroadworthy and seizing the operations of vehicles and operators who aren't sufficiently permitted and licensed?
Good evening and good evening to your listeners. Yeah, as an organization, we would have engaged with the Department of Transport. We have been, since 2019, on the doors of government requesting compliance, regulation and registration. And then only in February, we have then as an organization started engaging with the MEC to try and resolve issues that we have. And then you would know that for the longest time, government has neglected the sector. There was no regulation. Hence, when we came into the scene, we requested the 3 R's, which are regulation, registration, and recognition. When we were busy discussing standard operating procedures, requirements, and the backlog on learner transport and the issues that are related to compliance, then government started, impounding cars that are supposedly unroadworthy. But then you'd realize that the vehicles, not all vehicles that were impounded were unroadworthy. Some of the vehicles were just impounded simply because they are not, they don't have operating licenses. And our issue would be then, if government has an issue with operating licenses, the processing, the requirements that are not standard across operations.
Thabo, just to pause you there. I think it's important that we establish this, because I think it's not useful to say some of the vehicles that were impounded are roadworthy, they just don't have operating licenses. How many vehicles have been impounded and how many of them are unroadworthy?
I would not have the stats on top of my head, but then less than 30% of the cars that we checked, because we would have embarked on a process of vetting and checking cars over the holidays to say, when we were busy with the back to school campaign, to say operators must come in, we must check our cars, and you would know with the office of the MEC going on that campaign to the back to school campaign to try and check the roadworthiness of the vehicles and make sure that all operators are, within the regulated requirements, which is license, PDP, and the vehicles are tested. So our cars would have gone to the testing, they would gotten the roadworthy certificate, but they were taken in any case.
Yeah, the cost for non-compliance is just seemingly too high, Thabo, because if your vehicle is unroadworthy or not sufficiently licensed, we can't trust you to operate vehicles on our roads transporting children, because it results in situations like we've seen in the Vaal and various other parts of the country where children quite literally die on the roads as a result of vehicles that are not roadworthy or not sufficiently licensed and that don't have the necessary operating permits. The cost is just simply too high. Surely the frustration with the MEC must not be the impounding, but rather that the approvals processes, at least for permits, is one that's laborious and slow.
Correct. I think that is the gist of what we're saying, so that the department itself does not have its house in order. Hence, if you would have seen our memorandum, it talks to those issues to say requirements for licensing, there's ever-changing goalposts, because in Gauteng, there's 5 regions. You'd find that regions have different requirements. That's frustrating our members. If they say this is what the requirement this week, to say this is what you have to do, 1, 2, 3, 4. We go in, submit, you get the new requirements. You'd have seen the MEC would have announced some of these things. Whilst we're busy, we just realized with other people on media that these are the new requirements, which have not been discussed.
Okay, let's pause there.
So
let's pause there, Thabo.
And frustrates the process.
What are those new requirements? And I think it's important that you outline them to us specifically as things that exist now that didn't exist a few weeks ago. When I spoke to the MEC a few weeks ago, the MEC said when it comes to things like a PDP, for instance, she understands that there's a backlog in the office and that processing them are quite slow. But at a very minimum level, what they require from transport operators is to prove that they had applied. And one of the ways to prove that you have applied is to keep the receipt of the payments that you paid to have your application processed. That was sufficient at least a few weeks ago. What are some of the new requirements that points to the ever-shifting goalposts?
Yeah, in terms of applying an operating license, you'd now realize that there's a contract that is required from our members from the Department of Education, which is the schools that we transport kids to, which was never there before. In fact, we have a frustration whereby the schools are not giving out those contracts because they are, the Department of Education has not authorized the issuing of those letters, but they are a requirement in accordance with what is being requested of the operators currently.
Yeah, okay. Why is that so cumbersome? Why is it so difficult to have a contract signed between the school and the operator, or the parents and the operator, that makes it impossible for drivers at this point to comply with?
Though, the issue is not the drivers not wanting to comply. The issue is drivers going to the schools that they transport kids at and requesting those letters, and the principals at the school are telling the operators that they are not required by law to issue out those contracts.
Yeah, explain to me, the contracting, at least for operators that are being paid by the department to operate the service, who signs that contract? Is it the operator and the school, or is it the operator and the department?
Yeah, that is the issue. That seems to be the confusion. Remember, as the operators who are doing door-to-door service would not have a contract with the department or the government, but would have contracts with individual parents that we transport their kids for, as opposed to the bus services which have a contract with the, come again?
So those are private operators?
Yeah, we are a door-to-door service that has contracts with individual parents.
Okay, so what is the issue there? Because you still need to be compliant. Your driver still needs to have a PDP. Your vehicle still needs to be roadworthy. Your vehicle still needs to have an up-to-date license disc registration. What seems to be the issue there?
There's no issue. This is what I'm saying. Those issues have been agreed upon, and as an organization, would have said those requirements have to be a non-negotiable issue. And beyond that, that is where we have a problem to say, in terms of operating license, the sector has been neglected. They have not been issuing license for the longest of time. Now, come this time, there is a pressure to have those licenses available. But then if you go to the toll app, they are not being issued expeditiously. So you cannot have it. But then we said at least operators, as we would have seen, the MEC would have had a moratorium, a 2-month moratorium on that particular issue, to say there should not be impoundment for operators' licenses whilst we resolving the issue.
Okay,
but
so I think
currently,
I think it's important that we delineate here because I think we're conflating two different sorts of regimes that might be confusing. Now, my understanding is, Thabo, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there are two types of operators. There are public operators, that is to say, operators who have contracts with the Department of Education, and then there are private operators. Those are operators that have contracts with the parents, the individual parents. They are the ones paying for the service, not the Department of Education. Now, scholar transport operators that have contracts with the department have a different, seemingly different regulatory hurdle to jump than those who are private operators who hold contracts directly with the parents. Who do you represent in this instance, and what seems to be the issue for those that you represent specifically?
We are a service, like I've said before, a door-to-door service that would represent, I think, nationally over 80% of transport of operators that are belonging to associations. Those associations would have contracts with parents directly, not the department nor the school. So the other services being, which we call contracted services, these are the services that are being paid by government to the bus operators. And the issue with us is their requirements that are inconsistent and that are not speedily processed.
Okay, so for those of you who are private operators, as I phrased it, you say door-to-door service operators, what are the specific requirements for them? So far, we understand is that you must have a PDP, your vehicle must be roadworthy, must be duly licensed, but you must also have some sort of approval from the department to be a scholar transport operator. It seems that's what you're telling me. Am I understanding you correctly?
That's correct.
Okay, and so you're struggling to get the approval as a transport operator, and as a result, the vehicles of your operators are getting impounded. Am I understanding that correct?
That's correct.
They're getting impounded for two different reasons. One, because they don't have the necessary compliance, and two, the vehicle is not roadworthy. You say the split is about 70-30%. So let's not talk about those who are not roadworthy. They don't belong on our roads. Let's talk about those who are roadworthy but don't have the necessary licenses. They are facing a backlog at the moment. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether to call it a backlog, because I think you'd know that there's a lot of operators. Maybe if you have seen the masses that were marching on Friday, they would have give you an indication of how many members we have, as opposed to just over 300 and something operating licenses that are in Gauteng. So that should tell you a story there. That the processing of the operating licenses is not up to scratch, and that is as a result of non-consistent requirements in terms of operating those licenses. Then that gives us a frustration in terms of maybe to just to add, the MEC says the turnaround time should be around 3 months for a license to be issued from the start of the application. But then on Saturday, she was issuing licenses that were applied for in between 2023 and 2024. Only yesterday, I think she issued about 35. So that is a story on its own, to say there is an issue within the department that needs to be resolved as a matter of urgency.
Yeah. Thabo, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate you coming onto the program and telling us your side of the story. That is Thabo Swakamisa, who is the chairperson of the Greater Gauteng Scholar Transport Operators. We had invited the MEC of Transport in the province, Kedibone Diale-Tlabela, but she was unfortunately unable to join us today on the program due to a family emergency, but has availed herself to speak to us any other time. We'll certainly have that conversation. We're going to take a short break. We'll continue on the other side of this.